Because the 1978 policy had given itself a 14-year period for implementation of its recommendations and suggestions, 1992 was the next round for another policy to come about. And so that's exactly what we see. 14 years after 78, in 1992, we get another policy. And the aims of education for the 1992 policy were to promote Islamic values through education. Now, here we see a slight change in the terminology. It says promote Islamic values through education. It's not simply teach the Islamic values, but to promote them. We wanted individuals to practice those Islamic values in their very lives. What in 1992 the policymakers probably saw was that knowing the principles, learning the principles was not good enough if you never used those principles in your daily life. So here, for the first time, we see a direct connection between what you receive in education with what you can actually do in your real life. Experience what you've learned. A large number of educated men and women will be prepared to bring healthy changes in society. Again, the 1992 policy focuses on men and women, both males and females, boys and girls. Both have to be prepared to bring about healthy change in society. If there was time, we needed the change. We needed lots of change. And even if we don't want change, change will come. So how do you prepare young men and women to face the challenges of change? And the change here really is technological. We've seen the virtual world come about, and those changes are imperative. If we never brought about computer education or IT or technology or those kinds of things into our curriculum, we would be at a loss. So how do you teach young people to work with these new technologies now to cope with the changes that will be present, whether they like it or not? The whole educational system should be reorganized and be established on modern lines. The 1992 policy people saw that we were still focusing on what we had inherited. Things were changing, times were changing, technology was coming about, and these policymakers recommended that the entire education system be reorganized on modern lines. How do you bring about computer, technological education? How do you bring about mass media? How do you bring about information fluency into our classrooms? How do you know what information you need and what information you don't? After all, no human being needs all the information that is being generated so rapidly today. So how do you influence the fluency of education and information that is flooding the cognitive market today? A trend of critical thinking will be produced in students instead of learning by rote. Learning by heart, rote learning, memorizing, and simply giving it back on a test or an exam was not seen as a good way to learn. And the 1992 policymakers recommended critical thinking. How do you look at a situation? How do you look at an event and analyze it? How do you find the good and the bad? How do you find the advantage and the disadvantage? How do you propose to use it or not use it? Follow it or to leave it alone? Critical thinking skills are important. A practical type of education will be given to students to enable them to create creative means of livelihood. People come to education, to schools and colleges, in the hope of getting a good job, earning well, and living a good life. So, this policy recommended to provide practical types of learning, to provide hands-on learning instead of just reading from books, writing or copying from the board, and listening to the teacher. More needed to be done, and the more was to give practical hands-on experiences no matter what field of study you are in, because that would equip you with the skills that you would need in the job market to be successful.